everyone, today we're going to continue our discussion about notation, specifically discussing clefs. As we've mentioned, there are 4 clefs that we'll primarily use in this course. Now, I've said this before, but you should know that there are more clefs than just these 4. These are just the 4 we're going to be working with in this class. The first clef we're going to look at is one with which you're probably already pretty familiar, the treble clef. Another name for the treble clef is the G clef. We call it this because the clef symbol here centers around second line G here at the bottom, and at the top, the loop here centers around G as well. Here I've shown you the lines and spaces of the treble clef staff. E, G, B, D, and F. Some people find it useful to use a mnemonic device to remember the lines or spaces of any given clef. A common one you hear a lot is every good boy does fine, to remember the lines that correspond to the treble clef. Another one I like is every good burger deserves fries. Below, I've shown the corresponding spaces to the treble clef. We have F, A, C, and E. A good way to remember this one is it spells the word face. Here at the bottom, I've shown you all the corresponding notes to the lines and spaces of the treble clef staff. We have E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, and F. The next clef we'll discuss is the bass clef. Another name for the bass clef is the F clef. The reason for this is these 2 dots here just to the right of this ear or frowny face, depending on how you look at it, or the clef symbol, center around the pitch F. In this example, I've put the notes that correspond to the spaces of the bass clef staff first. Don't ask me why, I just did it that way. They are A, C, E, and G. A mnemonic device for this one is all cows eat grass. Here, I've shown the corresponding notes to the lines of the bass clef. They are G, B, D, F, and A. A good mnemonic device for this one is good burritos don't fall apart. And lastly, here are all the pitches that correspond to the lines and spaces of the bass clef. Starting on G, we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and A. Before we move on to the 2 C clefs in this class, I thought we'd discuss why we even need clefs to begin with. You might be wondering, I've only used treble clef on my instrument this whole time. Why do I need to learn these other ones? Well, it comes down to making music easier to read. Here on the screen, I've written some pretty low notes. I've put them in treble clef by using ledger lines to extend the treble clef into the low register. Now, if you play an instrument that regularly uses ledger lines above or below the staff, you might be thinking, what's the big deal? That's not that hard for me to read. But if this were something more complicated than just a downward scale or had accidentals or more challenging rhythms, it could quickly become kind of hard to read. Let's take our treble clef here and change it to an alto clef. Check it out. Now we don't need all of those ledger lines. More of the pitches in this passage fit inside the clef when we use the alto clef. Let's take it a step farther. What if we were to put this example into tenor clef? Again, now more of these pitches fit inside the staff. Just for fun, let's now put this example into bass clef. Now we've put every single pitch of this example in the staff. It's a lot easier to read and just looks a lot cleaner on the page. Let's change it back to a treble clef and zoom out. Here we see the same 8 pitches written in all 4 clefs. treble clef, alto clef, tenor clef, and finally bass clef. This is why clefs are really, really useful, because it just makes music easier to read. Now let's transition back to the two C clefs we'll be working with in this class. Remember, they are alto clef and tenor clef, respectively. Here I've shown the pitches that correspond to the lines and spaces of the alto clef. Now remember, some students can get alto clef and tenor clef confused. A good way to remember this is the tenor clef appears near the top of the staff. Alto clef appears on the third line of the staff. I've written our friend C4 as a reference. Now remember, with any of these C clefs, the center of the clef symbol will always point you to C4, or middle C. Following this C4, I've written the corresponding pitches to the lines of the alto clef. They are F, A, C, or C4, E, and G. Next, let's look at the notes that correspond to the spaces of the alto clef. They are G, B, D, and F. Here it is all put together. F, G, A, B, C, or C4, middle C, D, E, F, and G. Those are the pitches that correspond to the lines and spaces of the alto clef. Now let's talk about the other C clef that we'll be working with in this class, the tenor clef. As I mentioned before, you can tell the difference between tenor clef and alto clef by where it's placed in the staff. Tenor clef appears near the top, or on the fourth line from the bottom. Like all C clefs, the middle of the clef symbol will point you to C4, or middle C. Here I've written the notes that correspond to the lines of the staff in tenor clef. They are D, F, A, C, and E. On the next line, we see the notes that correspond to the spaces on the staff in tenor clef. They are E, G, B, and D. Here they all are put together. D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, and E. That concludes our discussion about clefs. Now, if you're someone who has primarily sang or played an instrument in one clef up until now, this might seem like a lot. With this and other topics in music theory, like keys and key signatures and intervals, it helps to think of these like learning your times tables again. A little bit of memory work, and you'll have these down in no time. Thanks, and I'll see you guys next time.